So this question asks us how to reduce the matrix to reduced row echelon form. So to get a matrix in reduced row echelon form, what that matrix essentially needs to look like is when all the diagonals are ones and everything beneath and above are zeros. And these diagonals are referred to as pivots. So once again, you want all your pivots to be ones and everything above and underneath zero. This is what a matrix in reduced row echelon form looks like. So I've copied our matrix A here, and the first row operation we're going to want to do is to get this 1 to be positive. So we're going to do that by applying the row operation R1 equals negative 1 times R1. And so since we're only applying changes to the first row, the second and third row can essentially stay the same. And now negative 1 gets applied to everything in row 1. So negative 1 becomes positive 1, negative 3 becomes positive 3, 2 becomes negative 2, and negative 15 becomes 15. So now that we have our first pivot here, 1, we're going to want to turn everything underneath that pivot into a 0. So in this case, we want to apply the row operation to row 2 of negative 3 times row 1 plus row 2. So once again, you can go ahead and copy your matrix, and since we're only applying a row operation to row 2, that means row 1 and row 3 can stay the same. So then you can go ahead and start applying the row operation. Negative 3 plus 1 is going to be negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times 3 is going to be negative 9 plus 3 is going to be minus 6. Negative 3 times negative 2 is going to be 6, plus 2 is going to be 4, and then negative 3 times 15 is going to be negative 45, plus 7 is going to leave us with negative 38. Now that we have our first 0 underneath our first pivot, we're going to go ahead and get our second 0 underneath our first pivot. We're going to do that by applying the row operation row 3 equals negative 1 times row 1 plus row 3. So once again, you redraw your matrix. Since we're only applying changes to the third row, the first and second row can be recopied. And then you go ahead and apply your matrix operation. So negative 1 times 1 is going to be negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 times 3 is going to be negative 3. Subtract another negative 3, we're going to have negative 6. Negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. Plus 2 is going to give us 4. And then negative 1 times 15 is going to be negative 15. Minus 7 is going to give us negative 22. So as you can see, we're done with our first column. We have our pivot in the first row and everything beneath it is 0. So now it's time to move on to the second column. We want that negative 6 to be a positive 1. So we're going to go ahead and apply the row operation. Row 2 equals negative 1 over 6 times row 2. Once again, since we're only changing the second row, you can go ahead and recopy the first and third row of your matrix as is. And then go ahead and apply the row 2 row operation. So we're going to have 0, positive 1, negative 4 thirds, and 19 thirds. So now that we have our second pivot, we're going to want to turn everything beneath it into 0. So that means this negative 6 right here. We're going to do that by applying a row 3 operation. That's going to be a positive 6 times row 2 plus row 3. So once again, you can go and recopy your two first rows because they're going to be exactly the same after this operation. Now that we've recopied our matrix, we can go ahead and apply the row 3 operations, which is going to give us 0, 0, -4, and 16. Now that we're done with everything underneath the second pivot, we're going to want to go and perform an operation to get our third pivot. So to do this, our third row operation is going to be row 3 equals -1/4 times row 3. Once again, you can go ahead and copy your matrix since it's going to be exactly the same. And so finally, we have our pivot complete in the third row. And as you can see, we have all of our pivots complete. So now we can start clearing the numbers above the pivot. So just to save us a little time here, I'm going to perform two operations in one go. So the two operations we're going to want to do here is to clear this 0 and clear this 0. And we're going to get that 0 in the second row in row 2 by applying 4/3 times row 3 to row 2. And we're going to get the 0 in row 1 by applying a +2 times row 3 to row 1. So to clear our last three right here, we're going to apply our last row operation to row 1, which is going to be row 1 equals -3 times row 2, and add that to row 1, which should give us our final matrix. So as you can see here, when you add -3 to row 2, you get -3. Add that to a +3, which gives us a 0, and then -3 times 0 plus 0 is 0, and then finally -3 times 1 plus 7 is going to give us our +4. And that is our reduced row echelon form matrix.